Did you know you can can beans without having to soak them beforehand? Today I'm going to show you how I can my dried beans. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaka Valley Homestead. Today I'm going to be canning up some dried beans that I've got. I always keep some dried beans on hand, but actually I prefer to use them from the can. So every once in a while when my can stock is getting low, I'll just can up another bunch of dried beans so I've got some on hand. This also works really well with chickpeas, especially if you want to be making your own hummus. And you can do it with canned lentils. You can make canned lentils as well. I like the method I'm going to use because, well, for one, it's lazy. It saves a lot of time. Ordinarily, most recipes you'll find will involve soaking the beans for at least 12 hours overnight and then adding a little bit more fresh water and then canning them from there. However, this method, you're just preempting that whole thing and you're just putting the beans straight into the water and then cooking them from there. Now, to can low acid foods, so vegetables and meats, seafoods, bone broths, those sorts of things, you do need a pressure canner. So okay, you just have a squeaky door, that's all. So I have got my pressure canner. My dear mother brought it for me from Amazon and paid almost as much in shipping as she did for the actual canner. Because we're all the way over in New Zealand, of course. If you are in New Zealand or Australia, I will put a link below for someone that does them in Australia, and so the shipping is a lot cheaper to get them here, and it's even cheaper again if you get a few of you together and buy a few of them together. They'll ship them in bulk, which is what a few people that I know actually ended up doing. So these cans, these jars, I'm going to be doing them in our 500ml or a pint size jar, because usually when we're using canned beans, I'm not using lots and lots of them. You can put them in the bigger 1 quart jars or the 1 litre jars. Generally speaking, a pint and a half quart, the jars are about the same size, and same with a quart and a litre jars. They're only within a few millilitres difference, so if you're trying to work that out, that's what they are. So these are half litre jars actually, but they're equivalent to a pint jar. Yeah, so when you are processing them, these ones we will pressure can at 10 psi. I presume it's psi. The pressures, or pressure can them at 10 for 70 minutes. If you're doing the bigger jars, you need to be doing them for 90 minutes. And this just makes sure that the beans are cooked all the way through and that you have actually killed the spores that can cause horrible diseases, which we're trying to avoid getting. A pressure canner is quite different to a pressure cooker in that, one, it is usually quite a bit taller, so you can stack jars in there, and two, it actually goes to a higher psi. So it is you can't use a pressure cooker for canning, but you can use a pressure canner for cooking. So how's that for confusing? However, I've got this, I can't remember what brand it is. Presto, how could I forget that? I've got this Presto canner, and it's like pretty much the cheaper model that you can get, and I've had no problems with it. It's brilliant. The only thing with it, every now and again you will have to replace the rubber seals, whereas if you fork out for the big fancy all-American one, it doesn't have the rubber seals to replace. But I've had this one for a couple of years and haven't had any problems with the seals. And the other thing is that my one just comes with the plain boring little rocker that goes on the top. These days, particularly if you buy it from the place in Australia that I'll link below, they have one where you can buy the particular one that will hold it automatically at the right pressure. So for this, you're looking at between 10 11 psi depending on what brand. Some do 10, some do 11. So that's the one that you'll be wanting to get for doing vegetables and meat in a pressure canner. If you live below 1,000 feet above sea level or 300 meters above sea level, then just the 11-pound weight is perfect. We're aiming for 11 psi. If you live above that, you're going to need to get the 15 psi weight, or aim for, on your dial, aim for 15 psi. This is because the higher up you are, the higher it's going to need to be. So usually they just have the two different weights in either a 10 or 11 or a 15, and so you need to be aware of where you live as to which one applies to you. If you're not sure, check in your pressure canner's manual or in the ball book. It's got instructions in there on the different weights and the different places that you live. Now there's two different ways of putting food into jars when you're canning. So there's usually a hot method and a cold method. And what you want to be doing is making sure you're putting hot food in hot jars in hot water, or cold food in cold jars in cold water, because if you've got any of those things the wrong way around, you'll end up smashing your jars. And one, that's a waste of food, and two, it's kind of dangerous having glass all through everything. So that's what I'm going to be doing cold packing. You can hot pack beans if you like, but it's a whole different way of doing it. That's usually you pre-soak them and then you boil them for 5 minutes and then you put them into hot water, into hot jars, into hot water. So I'm going to go with the cold process, and you need to make sure that you're following the instructions that come with your own canner, because they have varying amounts of water that they need you to put in the bottom. This one I usually put 3 to 4 litres in the bottom, 3 to 4 quarts, about a gallon of water in the bottom, and heat that up and then put my jars in there. But some of them have different requirements as to how deep the water needs to be, so just double check with your own canner's instructions. What you're going to need, I use my canning funnel all the time for all sorts of things, because the top of it is wider than the jar, so it makes it easier getting things into the jar. So we're going to need one of those. We need some dried beans. Now these beans are pinto beans, which, because I like making refried beans for our Mexican night. So these are some pinto beans that I bought. I do also can the borlotti beans that I make for the same reason. You can use kidney beans. And as I said, chickpeas work as well, and so do lentils. So these are just some pinto beans that I have bought. And what you need to do is just pick through them and make sure that there's not any random stones or bits of leaf or anything. I've already picked through these ones to make sure there's no gross things in there. And then I usually give them a quick rinse off as well. The other thing you'll need, obviously, is your jars. I have got a few of them here. My canner fits 7 of these around the bottom, so I've got 7 of them to do. And with the shorter ones, you can stack them on top of each other as well. One of the key things with a pressure canner is it comes with a grate in the bottom. This one's very discoloured, but it still works, so I'm not complaining. And that keeps the cans up. That keeps the cans up off the bottom, which will stop them exploding on the bottom of the pot. So anytime you're putting glass into a pot with heat underneath, you need to have them up on a rack. The other thing you'll need are some screw bands so that fit your jars. These are the ones, the same brand as what the jar is that I have. And some new seals that also fit. Now, officially, you're meant to heat your seals in hot water before you use them. But honestly, I don't, because I'm lazy. And I've never ever had a problem, because the reality is you're putting them into a hot environment. They're going to get hot before anything else gets hot anyway, and I've never had any problems with them sealing. If you are having problems with them sealing and you're not preheating them, feel free to heat them in some warm water first. You don't boil them, you just bring them to simmer, or just pour some water out of a hot kettle onto them just to heat them up. The idea is to heat that rubber before you put them on. The other thing you need to be doing is just checking them before you use them. Make sure there's not any nicks or any bits missing. Scratched lids will go rusty. Even though they're brand new, it's always worth checking. And same with the tops of your jars. Nip around and make sure that there's no cracks or chips along there, because they won't seal either. Right, so I'm just going to tip the camera so you can see what I'm doing. Alright, so canning beans is actually really, really easy to do. Make sure your jars are nice and clean and they're ready to go. And then all we need to do, in these smaller jars you want to put half a cup of beans, and in larger jars you want to put a whole cup of beans. Now that doesn't seem like very much beans in a jar, but by the time they soak up their water, you'll see at the end they'll be perfect. Now to each of these jars, I also add half a teaspoon of salt. This is optional. It has nothing to do with the preservation of the actual beans themselves. It is solely about flavour. Generally speaking, I don't recommend you add other herbs and spices to food that you're canning because the flavour goes funny when you can them. You're better off flavouring them up later when you're about to eat them. Now the next thing you need to do is simply to top the water up, leaving it what's called an inch of headroom. So an inch from the very, very top down, which with these jars is just underneath the edge of the rim. Headroom's really important. You'll find in different recipes that they require different amounts of headroom. And it's really important that you follow the recipes to make sure that you're getting the right headroom for each recipe. If you're not sure what you're doing, this is my favourite book. It's the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. I'll put a link to this down below. I really recommend it. It's got so many recipes in it and instructions on how to do so many things. So if you're not sure how to do what you're meant to be doing, this is the best reference book. Then once your water's in there, it's a really good idea to run a knife around, make sure you get out all the air bubbles. And if there were any big air bubbles, you can top the water level up. And then you simply place your seal on the top. Now if the rim's grubby or greasy or anything like that, it's always good to give it a wipe down. This isn't even wet, it's perfectly fine. So you pop your lid on and then you screw your band on to fingertip tight, which for all new canners is like, what the heck is fingertip tight? And the best way to work it out is to watch it. So all you want to be doing is tightening it as tight as you can, only using your fingertips. You don't want to be getting down there and tightening it like this. You don't want to have a jar tightener or anything. Just as tight as you can with the tips of your fingers. If you screw them down too tight, you risk the lids buckling, which is not ideal because then the seals don't work. So I'm just going to nip through and do the rest of these. Right, the very next thing I do is I put them into my canner and put in the water that the canner needs. Because they're nice and cold, it doesn't matter that I'm putting them on with my hands. If you're doing hot jars into hot water, you would probably quite benefit from using a jar lifter. Now the amount of beans I had only made 5 jars, but that's okay. I'm going to pop them in anyway and process them. Now when you're adding your water, you need enough water in there that it's not going to run dry over the processing time. Because with beans, you're processing them, the smaller jars, for just over an hour and a quarter, and so 75 minutes, and the bigger jars you're processing for a full 90 minutes. So it's always best to err on the side of caution, put a little bit too much water in, than to put not enough water in and have them run dry. So I'm going to put 4 quarts or 4 litres of water in here. And then I put the lid on and set it over medium to high heat until it is boiling so hard that the steam is pouring out the vent in the top. Now these lids come with instructions to make sure you're lining them up the right way to make sure that the seal works. So you just line the 2 V's up and then click it around. Really easy. The main reason I got the Presto canner, apart from the fact it was nice and cheap, was the fact that it's lighter and I can use it on my glass cooktop. I have also used it canning it on my wood stove and it has worked really well. I've been joined by a grumpy baby. Once the steam has been pouring out your vent for 10 minutes, once you notice it pouring out steadily, set your timer for 10 minutes and let it run for 10 minutes. And that's when you pop your rocker on top of your air release valve, and that's when the pressure will start climbing. So we're looking for 10 psi for the beans, and once you get to 10 psi that's when your timer starts. So for our littler jars of beans, we'll be running the timer for 75 minutes, and for the bigger jars of beans, you'll be running it for 90 minutes. Once that timer's up, you need to switch everything off and just don't move it, don't touch it, don't do anything for at least 6 to 8 hours. In this time, your pressure will return back down to normal, and only once your pressure gauge says 0 can you remove the rocker, and then you leave it for another 10 minutes to just sort of settle, I suppose, let that pressure settle down. If you get them out too quickly, you do risk all your liquid siphoning out and your seal's not working. So then once you've left them for another 10 minutes, then you can take the lid off, and then you can slowly and carefully, keeping them upright, remove your jars and put them onto either a wooden board or onto a folded dry towel. This is to stop them getting shock from going onto a cold surface. Pot is finally boiling. You can see the steam. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I can feel the steam pouring out the top. So I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Alright, this has now been venting for 10 minutes, so we're going to pop the rocker on. And that should make this pop out. Every now and again it won't pop, and so what I find, because it's just letting steam out, it just seems to crank slightly sideways. So what I found works really well is covering it, make sure it's a really thick piece of tea towel. You can see mine has reached 11 psi there, and my wee rocker is starting to rock its little socks off. So that means now's the time that I set my timer and we wait. At this time I also turn the temperature down a little bit to try and maintain the temperature at what it currently is. So for me, I move it from on high right down to about 4, but wherever you are, that will vary. The aim of the game is to keep that pounds of pressure at exactly 11. So just keep a really close eye on it while your time happens, and once you get a feel for your oven, you'll know better how much to leave it on. Right, the timer's going off. It's time to turn everything down. So we turn the timer off, turn the oven off, and then walk away. Just leave it like that until it cools down. Now these are completely cool, and it is time to check the seals. So what you do, you take the bands off, which most of them usually aren't too tight. And I usually just give it a good flick to see, make sure that that doesn't lift. And you want to check that this is pushed down and it doesn't wobble. If it wobbles or it puffs up or it just pings off, that means that it hasn't sealed properly and it either needs reprocessed straight away, or you can pop it into the fridge and use it within a week. I hope you found the video on canning beans really helpful. If you have, hit the like button, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food. I'll see you in the next one.